before we get going, probably a couple of words, please. Baking, private equity, profitable ideas exchange. Um, this is not a totally conventional path. And I think it informs the book. It informs a lot of what you wrote there. Not many people would actually be in a position to maybe write with the authority a book like the one that you guys wrote. So can you just tell us a little bit, maybe first about Tom McMakin and that interesting serpentine path that got you to writing that book?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and I went to school in Egypt, and then I went to school in Ohio. And in Ohio at Oberlin College, I was elected to run the student co-op association there, which is a housing and dining co-op, the second largest in the United States. So they owned a bunch of dormitories and sort of dining halls, and it was an enterprise of some size. And I was a philosophy major because that's what my passion was. But it's hard to make a living being a philosophy major. And I learned that I had a little talent for organizing people around a mission. And that's all business is, really, is sort of material and human beings around a sort of objective to add value. And so when I got out of college, I joined the Peace Corps, and they wanted me to continue my co-op work. So I worked in Cameroon and West Central Africa for 2 years, and I helped women start consumer co-ops to buy palm oil from the coast. I came back to the United States and I did various things, but I ended up in Montana, and I worked for a company called Great Harvest Bread Company, which, as you say, is a bread enterprise. But interestingly, it's a franchise. So we had about 200 units across the United States, each independently owned by entrepreneurs that wanted to own a little bread store. And I happened on the idea of most franchises are about command and control. You got to cook the fries for a certain amount of time. But we really wanted to have a much looser franchise where people were able to pour their own creativity into their enterprises. And so what value do we add as a franchisor? And what we decided was that we wanted to richly network these entrepreneurs together so that they could learn from each other. You might be good at marketing, and I might be good at baking bread, and someone else might be good at managing labor. And if we could get smart about how to strongly cross-link those enterprises, the whole would get stronger. I carried that thought. We sold that company, and I carried that thought into private equity because, as you know, many private equity firms have a number of portfolio companies that they own a piece of. And so I brought that vision of cross-linking entrepreneurs together to sort of drive success in the whole in private equity. And that worked very well there. I traveled a lot, and so I didn't want to try kids, and I was like, I don't want to travel anymore. So I bought this company, Profitable Ideas Exchange, and interestingly, it has the same business model, which is, what if we strongly cross-link executives together and have those conversations sponsored by people that want to do business with those executives. Not only will the executives get smarter, but we'll be able to sort of feed consulting expertise into the mix. And so that's the common link. Is I'm really intrigued by how community drives efficiency and revenues and overall best practices.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's I would have thought that it's a disjuncted set of disjunctions all the way along, but actually there's some threads that run right the way through.
There are, but I'll say, when I talk to kids that are my kids' age and they're kind of 20s, I say, an interesting thing happens if you climb the corporate ladder in a single discipline. You might be able to kind of get to the top, but in my experience, people that jump verticals, that is to say, go from one kind of business to another, oftentimes are more valuable. It's like a mashup of, oh boy, you know a lot about franchising, and you know a lot about consulting, boy, now you have a niche, which is I'm really good at franchise consulting, and you can kind of vault forward. I've seen that career pattern over and over again, where a politician becomes the chancellor of a university, or a CPA, you know, becomes the executive director of a nonprofit and combines two loves and two expertise. That can oftentimes vault you ahead of the people that are sort of grinding their way forward with their one discipline being a CPA.
Yeah, right. I might suggest too that sometimes overseas postings have that similar quality as well, where you know, and now's a nice time to sort of talk about things like Creedence Goods and trust building. But I lived in India for a year, which is not that common a post, and that has turned out to build a lot of trust and stand as a very uncommon point of commonality with clients where they care about it.
Yeah,
I mean,
you know,
living in India isn't a job, but but it
an
has some
adventure.
kind of yeah, it is, yeah.
You know, and I do think that nonprofit work, service work, builds credibility. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and then also as I mentioned to you before, had set up the Peace Corps program in the Baltic nations, and you know, I think people look at your resume and they say, wow, this is a person that took 3 or 4 years out of their lives to sort of better other human beings, and that's a kind of dog whistle that says, well, this is a pretty good person. I could more easily trust them than someone that was like had an uninterrupted 40-year run in hedge funds, rapaciously taking over companies and breaking them up or something like that.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So let's talk a sec about this guy here.
Yeah, you
And
bet.
there's a couple of books. There's a couple of books under your belt now, but um, How Clients Buy. Interesting title. Actually, not a, you know, we read, digest, review a lot of sales books. My thought this morning was there aren't a lot of books in this field that start with the word how. There are plenty that start with why, which are meant to be like, oh, why things are like that and why things are like that, or even what. There's, you know, some quite have some titles such as like what you should say and what to do. And a book that begins with how is kind of a secret, right? I mean, that already says something about the way that this book is organized, but maybe just give me kind of a premise for why the book was needed in the world.
Yeah, you know, so our firm is focused on professional services firms, broadly construed. It used to be professional services firms were CPAs and lawyers because they were licensed, but now it means all manner of consultant or engineers or marketing people that sell expertise. And you know, I just noticed running a professional services firm that there were not a lot of books focused on how professional services firms sell. And it occurred to me that they sell quite differently than a telephone company like Verizon, where when you go into a Verizon store to buy an iPhone, the most junior person in the entire organization is a salesperson. And yet when you buy legal services, you oftentimes talk to the most senior person who might engage you and then hand you off to a more junior person. So I could tell right away that sales were different in professional services, but I found myself wondering, like, how are they different? And then, you know, Doug Fletcher and I, my co-author, we were intrigued with design theory. And design theory says, hey, kind of flip the script and say, start from the consumer, start from the consumer's perspective. So instead of saying, how could we sell more professional services to a client firm, we asked ourselves simply, under what conditions do executives in a potential client firm reach out of their own expertise or the people on their team and hire outside expertise? And so that was the sort of birth of this question, like what steps, what preconditions must exist before a potential client goes, you know what, let's go find ourselves a marketing firm. And how do they choose? How do they connect? That first book, How Clients Buy, really answers the question, how does a firm attract new logos? How do they land new accounts? When we got done with that book, not to sort of jump ahead, we got quite a lot of feedback from folks in the professional services firm that said, you know, what we're really interested in is, 80% of our new revenues year over year come from our existing clients. So
Yeah.
we're interested in new logos, but what we're really interested in is how to land and expand in a client. And so that's the sort of, those two books answer different questions: how to find new clients and how to expand your remit within a client where you're already doing work.
Yeah, I've got the copy of your other book here, and I want to do this on a future review with you. But the subtitles, and they look like a natural pair. The subtitle goes Practical Guide to Business Development, i.e., upstream for consulting professional services. How the world's best consulting professional services firms expand, in red font, client relationships. So yeah, that in our experience, serving and guiding clients on these two domain fronts is natural. That's not a surprise to hear that they need that.
We just saw a void in the marketplace. I mean, I would have bought these books if I could have and read them. And I'm like, well, there aren't books that sort of target what I'm looking for. So let's write a book. And of course, we don't have any resident expertise. We're not like rocket scientists, but what we do, I feel pretty confident in, is in our ability to interview people. So we interviewed rainmakers across a great raft of professional services firms, top law firms, and IBM and Accenture and BCG and McKinsey and Bain and big four accounting firms. And we talked to rainmakers that are 40 years in the field and said, what do you do? And what's your perspective on why this is so hard? And so then we kind of organized those interviews into a set of best practices.
Yeah, structurally, something interesting in this book is it basically goes set up the problem. Then you have this meaty section in the middle that's called 7 elements. We'll get into that in a sec. And then you have a lot of prescriptive advice. You give people a lot of direction. And actually, those things are happening all the way through. The problem is continually like refined, restated, chapter by chapter by chapter. And there's some prescriptive and descriptive work all the way through. But that's the overall structure. You could almost get it, if nobody knew that you had a philosophy background, they'd probably get a hint by the fact that the problem is dealt with very thoroughly. So it's not sort of 3 quick pages on, hey, there's a problem out there. But I think you must have really felt that problem quite personally, or understood it intimately, because fully, a third of the book is setting up and describing the problem in some detail, including a large section on obstacles. So not only do we have a problem, but also solving that problem has a bunch of additional obstacles in its way before we're going to be able to get to some answers. Can you tell me about problem setting?
Yeah, I think part of that is just to win the trust of your reader. Like, we're fellow travelers. We know the pain. We know this seems like it should be easy. I'm the smartest person, say, in the world on cybersecurity. Shouldn't my phone just be ringing off the hook? Or I used to run cybersecurity for, General Mills. You'd think every ag-related company in the world would be calling me, but that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen for us, and it doesn't happen for our clients, and it didn't happen for the rainmakers that we talked to. And so it seemed like, well, so what the heck is going on here? Why is this so hard? And so we did lay it out in some detail. There's some obvious things that people don't want to be salespeople. They're professionals, they're white collar professionals, and they think of sales as a kind of a manipulative kind of skeezy profession. Like, I really think sometimes sales is, exploiting information asymmetries to cause you to do something that you wouldn't ordinarily do if you had full information. So that's a problem, because the people that we're working with, practice leads at consulting firms, or people that own emerging consulting firms, they're like, I'm not an auto salesman. I'm a smart person has a body of experience that I think could really add value to the people that I think of as potential clients. So that's like a for real obstacle. Another obstacle, I think, is simply that most professionals that work in expert service firms, they've spent all their time in school getting expert at their domain. And yet
Mm.
now they rise up to be the head of Verizon or the head of a law firm. And they have to be rainmakers, and they're kind of at a loss. Like, ask me a question and I'll tell you the answer about cybersecurity, but making new friends and landing new clients, that's something I have no experience with and no training at all.
Mhm.
Well, so when we say that to, to practice leads, they're like, you're right, I don't. It's not my fault that I'm no good at this. I need a strategy. I need something to sort of read and understand and then go, okay, that makes sense. That's something I could do that I feel comfortable with.
So you have there's two things that you advise your clients to do, or your readers to do, and one is set aside time for business development. The other one is become your own chief revenue officer. Um, I would love to just hear a couple of more words from you about those two, because they have the mark of very practical advice. This sounded to me, as reading, like words that you've literally spoken to clients or maybe your own staff before.
Yeah, right.
This didn't sound academic.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, you're familiar with the kind of urgent and important quadrants, right? Like the 4x4, where we want to live in the kind of important realm, non-urgent realm. That's hard to get to, but we tend to live in the kind of unimportant but urgent. Like, oh crap, someone's like ringing the doorbell. I gotta hang on 1 second here. I gotta walk upstairs and answer the door. Um, and so I think business development, which is a systematic effort to make new friends, and to understand what they're doing and what challenges they're facing, can often on our to-do list just drop to the bottom. It's happening to me right now. Like, I'm feeling the need to drive business development, and but I have a couple things that are edging that out. They're important, but they're urgent. And so what we heard from rainmakers over and over again was, it's just a habit. You have to make it a habit. It has to be something, every Thursday I spend time reaching out to make new friends, or every morning I spend an hour and I send out some emails and I try and set up some appointments with people that I'd be interested in getting to know. There has to be some sort of discipline around the important and the non-urgent, or you never get to it. Your life gets sort of sucked into the urgent and the unimportant. So I mean, I think we heard that over and over again, that it's a way of life. Driving business development is a way of life, and you have to think of it that way, as opposed to a lot of people that go, who can I hire to do this? Or who can I delegate this to? Or I'll do a push for a week, and then I've got to like get on and do the work. It's a little like Michael Gerber in that book he wrote. It's working on the business, not working in the business.
Mm.
And consultants can get kind of sucked into working in the business, which is delivering work. And that's why consulting is so it's characterized by sort of elder statespeople in the industry as boom and bust. If you talk to McKinsey, Bain, or BCG, they're like, it's terrible. We get all this work, we hire all these bright young kids from the best universities in the world, and then suddenly there's no pipeline of future opportunities, and then we have to lay them all off, and we have to like, look, we have to do some business development now. So anyway, that's something we just heard over and over again.
Yeah. So, and when you say become their own chief revenue officer, is that? I don't think you're talking about really small shops. It's like you have to become the chief revenue officer because you're in a three-man law firm in a small town. I think you mean, if I understand you right, this is a different idea than that. It's not about being in a small professional services business.
Well, I mean, I think we meant to sort of say that in a different way. In expert service firms, the higher up you get, if you want to be partner in a big firm, but also if you want to be, if you want to be successful in a small firm, you have to think about whatever your domain is as a P&L. And so you have the cost of delivering the service, either your time or people that you hire. but you have to drive revenues. You can't delegate it. You can't hire out. There's just no alternative to you personally, whether you run a 50-person shop or a 3-person shop or a 4,000-person shop, driving revenues. I mean, Julie Sweet, who's the CEO of Accenture, which has, I don't know, 450 or 500,000 people across the world, she has the habit of dropping by customers to see how they're doing and to see if there are other ways in which they can help. And then she's very active in various circles and boards and exchanges to try and make new friends, because it's her job as CEO to land big new clients, in addition to other people in the firm.
So I'm kind of smiling as you're saying this, because I was reading the last chapters, and in the last chapter, sort of drill sergeant, football coach, Tom McMakin comes out. So there's a real butt kicking happening in the last chapters, where you're really saying you have to get to work. You don't have the option of being complacent on these issues. So can you give some sort of practical ideas or suggestions for what that looks like? So besides the general imperative, you must be your own CRO, you must get out there. In practical terms, in terms of getting to work, what can some of these folks do?
Yeah, I mean, so let's just start with the dominant metaphor of sales, which is of the funnel, the sales funnel. Most people, even if they've not gone to business school or had any particular training in sales, are familiar with that notion. And the idea is that you pour leads in the top of the funnel, and these are people that may or may not be able to buy your services, and you pitch them your wares, and a certain percentage of them go, well, I'd be interested in a proposal, and then a smaller number you send a proposal to, and then it's kind of binary, they buy or they don't. And you need to keep pouring stuff in the top in order to sort of drive business development. I think what we found was that that's wholly inappropriate to the world of professional services. No one actually does it that way. And the main reason is the number of people that an expert could potentially serve is somewhat limited. There's not, and that model of a funnel requires an unlimited number of leads that you can pour in the top. But if you are the best accountant in Canada focused on mining companies, you have a niche, you've done some work for a mining company, and you effected a digital transformation that is imported RPA and artificial intelligence to reduce staff and reduce the risk of sort of fat fingers, and you've really brought a lot of value to this mining company. And based on a referral, you do a second gig at another mining company, this one in British Columbia, and you see some real success. Now you've got yourself 2 case studies, and you can begin to say, you know what, I'm one of a handful of people that are the world's experts at driving finance inside of mining companies. That's the start of a niche, which lots of people counsel professional service providers to do. You can't give advice on everything. You have to give advice on something fairly narrow. Anyway, if the metaphor of a funnel is wrong, then what is the right metaphor? And I think of it as a garden, which is you start out as a junior CPA and you're working on an assignment, and you make a friend at a mining company. And we heard this from rainmakers all the time. You grow up and they grow up, and you become a senior partner at Deloitte, and they become the CFO of a mining company. And you sort of stay in touch, and you stay proximate to the problems that they have, and you work to add value to them over your career. And when there suddenly becomes a problem that they can't solve, you're on the short list of people that they call and go, hey, Tom, I know you've done a lot of work with mining companies, and we're pulling our hair out right now on this. What's your experience with this? And it's a fairly easy pivot after you've had that conversation to say, would it be helpful for me to scope a sort of statement of work on how we might enter into your company right now and do work? So back to the metaphor, I think the metaphor of a garden is a much better a metaphor for professional services where there are a limited number of prospects in your niche. You are meeting people, you're working with people, and you are planting seeds, and you're carefully nurturing those seeds through thought leadership that you might produce, by inviting them to a roundtable you might host. You're staying in touch with them, and anyway, when there is suddenly, you're staying proximate to the person that you'd like to serve.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, those plants grow, and you are able to harvest opportunities over time. But it's very difficult to sort of figure out when that's going to happen. You might call up somebody and make a friend and get a kind of gig out of it in a month.
Mm-hmm.
But more typically, it takes 2 or 5 or 10 years before you harvest a gig out of a relationship. And so the most practical thing I think I would say are just twofold. One is define your niche and understand the limited universe of human beings that you want to serve. And it's almost always 500 or less.
Mm-hmm.
And then add value and stay close to those folks over a long period of time.
That was something that really stood out to me, was that you're defining in a couple of places, a couple of great quotes that I took out of your book, and they all had the same quality, which was you identify a community and its problems, and you set yourself forth to get to know that community, become valuable to it, and serve.
Yeah, I mean, like a hero of mine is Dominic Barton, who's from BC, as it turns out, and
right, and who shows up in the book, who features in the book considerably.
Yeah. So he was gracious enough to give us an interview, and his story is interesting. He became the CEO of McKinsey, and back to our earlier conversation about sometimes when you grind forward, you accelerate your career less fast than when you do something that's sort of counterintuitive. So he was toiling away in the Toronto office, and there was an opportunity to open up a Korean office, and McKinsey had no footprint there at all. And so he went to Korea, to Seoul, and he started reaching out to banking executives. And he said, I ran the banking practice in Canada, and I'd love to just stop by and get a sense of how your problems are different, but also tell you what I learned working for those big banks. And he got lots and lots of meetings. He didn't pitch at all. He never said, I can help you. But what he did offer is he said, if you find this interesting, I'd be happy to talk to your company broadly for free. And so he's adding value. And pretty soon, in short order, really, in a year or year and a half, he became the banking expert in Korea, the go-to person as a consultant. And as it turns out, he built Korea, and then he built the rest of Asia out similarly with a lot of help. And because Asia is the fastest growing economy, McKinsey as a whole, the partnership said, we want you to lead the entire company going forward.
Yeah.
But again, he was very clear. He's like, I keep in touch with 300 people. There are 300 chief executives that I consider to be the people that I want to serve in my practice and in McKinsey. And other people at McKinsey that run other P&Ls and have other expertise will have their 300 people. But he goes, it's sort of impractical, really, to keep in touch with more than 300 people. And that's why a niche is so important. So international banking, he wanted to know the CEOs of the 300 biggest banking companies in the world. There it is, end of story. Sometimes I think it's if someone successfully defines a niche, you want that niche not to just say, I want to be the expert at banking around the world. You want to associate names with it because there are human beings that you want to talk with. So in his case, there were 300 human beings, men and women, that ran banks around the world that he wanted to get to know. And you could almost imagine him putting those folks' faces on the wall and saying, in the first quarter, I want to make friends with 10 of those. And over my career, I'm going to make friends with all 300 of them. But small is beautiful in this case. And that's so hard for a new consultant because Their natural tendency is to say yes to everything. And so you ask them, what do they do? Websites are fine. If you get on a consultant's website, oftentimes it's very unclear what they do.
For sure.
Because they don't want to, they're like, I could do this. And, Dominic Barton, he probably could talk about strategy in consumer products companies. He probably could talk about human capital in the retail sector. But he chose, based on his interest, his expertise, and some of his early success, to niche himself around banking.
Yeah. I love that idea of the of having the images on your wall and just saying we're going to take those down, almost like the the deck of cards. There's 52 people, and maybe this week we're going to see the 7 of clubs, and next week we'll see the
I do that all the time. I set myself a goal of 10 new substantive real relationships with one of the set of 300 that we want to serve, getting to know them. And again, I never go into it thinking sales. I think identifying problems, identifying trends, and then figuring out a way to add value. We'll talk about trust later on, but one of the best ways to build trust is to turn down work. So if you were to call me and I was an expert at, I don't know, finance and mining companies, he said, Tom, you're like a really smart accountant. I know you've done a bunch of work. I'm wondering if you could do my firm's taxes, and we're in the retail industry. You earn trust when you say, you know what, I'm not your guy. I'm not your guy. I'm a mining guy, but I know somebody in another firm that is expert and whom I really respect, and that does retail finance tax. And I want to introduce you to them, because there you're not acting in your own interest. You're acting in the potential client's interest. And when that multinational has a mining problem, you're the person that they're going to call.
We do a lot of work with law firms, and the big badge of honor that they have is when they get opposing counsel to refer them. And when they talk about why opposing counsel refers them, it's funny. It's a funny one, Tom. I think there's some kind of like warrior code amongst them that I haven't totally decoded, but it's something like what you've just said. They've established where they will and won't work. They've turned things down. They've sort of played by some Bushido code we don't know. But once they've demonstrated that they will do it, they will get even opposing counsel to say, I can't take your work because I'm working for the opposite party in this case, but I might recommend to you Wei Lin at Rajan Tan. And then this is sort of like about as high integrity as it can come in terms of a validation of having maintained yourself in a community in the right way. Somebody says they're a badass lawyer, and they should actually be across the table from us.
Yeah, they have my respect.
Yes.
And I see lots of attorneys, and this is one that's going to surprise you, but I recommend this attorney. And the people, when you don't vote in your own interests, people trust you a lot more. They listen to what you say.
So look, we just said I've been kind of waiting to talk about this in particular, but we were just talking about trust. We just touched on trust. We certainly touched, without saying the word, on awareness and so on. So maybe I can just kind of read to you, and then I can let you go with it. 7 elements of client's decision journey, and they go in a kind of a natural order in that there's arrows here. But I should also say that you surprised me with a sentence which later on made a lot of sense, which is this journey might stop here, reappear elsewhere. You might move from 1 to 6 in an instant.
It's not serial. I don't think of it as serial. We think of it as serial, but it's not serial necessarily.
So here they are. Aware, I've heard of you. Understand, I know what you do. Interest, the results you promise will help me. Respect, you are credible. Trust, you have my best interests at heart. Able, I can marshal all the resources. And then in the center of this diagram, ready, the timing is good. Can you just tell readers who will later get the chance to read the full middle section of the book where all of this gets heavy treatment, just maybe say a couple of words about the 7 elements, where they came from, why you're using them as the alternative to a funnel visual.
Yeah, I mean, so the story of the book is a fun story. So I run this consulting firm. We're not big. We have like about 80 people or something. And a friend of mine who sold his consulting firm, a small consulting firm, and he wanted to start a new practice. And so he put together a deck of all his capabilities. And he said, I want to pitch you. So he took me out for coffee and he sat down and he pitched me on all the things he could do. And I said, man, Doug, I believe you can do all these things. And I love working with you. And I don't want to buy any of them. They don't answer any questions that I have. And then he used to work for A.T. Kearney. He said, all right, well, let me ask you a question. What are the problems that you're facing right now that you'd pay almost any amount of money to solve? And I'm like, that's the best consulting question ever. It completely flipped my head away from his deck and his capabilities and me going, no, no, no. And it got me focused on myself. And I'm like, well, I had two. I remember very specifically, I said, I want someone to build a kind of financial model, like the kind of they use in private equity to sort of project results and to understand sensitivities. And I would pay I can't find anybody to do that for me that has that private equity skill. And I'd pay you. He went to Darden at the University of Virginia. It's a good business school. I'm like, I'd pay you to do that. And he goes, what else you got? And I said, well, I'm trying to deconstruct how clients buy. I'm trying to understand how business development occurs in this new industry for me. He goes, I'd like to help you with that. And I'm like, all right, then I'm willing to pay you some money. And so we sat down over the course of 6 months and we just asked ourselves over and over again, what are the stepping stones that potential clients step on before they engage? What are the preconditions that must exist? And so, awareness has been around forever. And that's where traditional marketing oftentimes sit, awareness and understanding. So I can't buy from you, Kevin, unless I know you exist. If I don't know you exist, we're never going to build a bridge from your expertise to me as a potential client. And so we have to think about ways in which we can just like get our name out there. But for many people, that is the sum of business development, just getting their name out there. And it's not enough. The second thing is that you have to understand what I'm expert at. I have to communicate very clearly. I'm one of the world's experts at finance and mining companies. That's what I do. And so a crisp, niched kind of offering where you have plenty of credibility is important. And so this is the stuff of websites, right? We serve mining companies with finance. Here's some case studies. Here's who we are. Here's our background. 3 of us used to work for mining companies as CFOs. So we know that's a precondition. People have to know who you are and have to know what the heck you do. I got on not to name names, I got on the Accenture website one time, a long time ago, and I'm like, I have no idea what these people do. Because they do everything. And it's a problem for marketers of really big consulting firms because it's hard for them to explain what they do because they do so much. They do cybersecurity, they do human capital, they do strategy, they do all sorts of things. And then there has to be interest. So that is to say, it has to be relevant. What you do has to be relevant to a problem that they're trying to solve. If I'm pitching you, I have to somehow know, you could know me and know what I do, but if you think it's not worth bringing outside help because you just hired a rock star CFO in your mining company, then you're not going to want to engage with me, even if I'm the best. And so some understanding of, you have to be relevant to the problems of the day that they're trying to solve. I'm gonna jump to the last two because I find the next two, which are sort of respect and trust, to be the most interesting. The last two, of course, is you have to be able, which is you have to budget. There has to be some means by which you can engage, and the final is you have to be ready. I find a lot of consultants will go through all 7 of these or all 6 of these, the first 6, and they'll find that their clients are not ready to engage, and they're like, they're on that sales funnel, like, oh shoot, I pitched them and they said no, and they move on. And they're like, okay, next, like a shark in the water, they just keep moving. But when someone's not ready and you've got the first 6 in line, they trust you, they know what you do, they think you do great work, then it's time to hang around the hoop. It's time to continue to add value, because things change and readiness state can change at any moment. People cannot be ready because they have a boss that's about to retire and has no appetite for new projects, or they can be not ready because their company is about to be sold or they're about to acquire something, or they could be not ready because the CEO has said, we're going to really focus on the customer this year and not investments in technology. But things change. And so keeping a weather eye out for when opportunity presents itself is really important. So not to prattle on, but I do feel like respect and trust are the most interesting. So we know David Meister wrote a great book around this called The Trusted Advisor many years ago that many people in consulting have read. And he said, look, that's the goal. The goal is to be a trusted advisor to a client, whether you're engaged in a SOW or not, even if you're there available for a quick call. But the question then is, how do you build trust broadly? And I think what we learned, we interviewed a professor at Northwestern University in Chicago in the Kellogg School of Business. And he said, like there's two different kinds of trust. And that distinction is really important to keep in mind. The first is, do I believe, Kevin, you can do the job? Do I trust that you can do the job? And the second, we call that respect. And the second is, do I think you have my best interests at heart?
Right.
And they can be very different things. I can think you're the smartest person in the world at intellectual property inside of a law firm. But if I think you're a shark, and when my back is turned, you're gonna vote in your own self-interest and overbill me, you might have my respect, but you don't have my trust. Likewise, you could have my trust. You could be my next door neighbor, and I'm like, I would send my kids over to your house any day of the week because Kevin is the nicest guy. I trust him with my children, but he doesn't have my respect when it comes to cybersecurity. I'm not going to hire him for that. So you've got to have both. You've got to have respect, credibility in your particular offering, and then also trust. Respect is pretty easy to build. We call that case studies, which is, oh, I've done a bunch of the work before, and you can call other mining companies and they'll tell you that I do good work. I think it's a fairly well understood concept. That's the world of case studies and references. With the hardest rope to push in this whole 7 elements is, how do I gain your trust? How do I communicate to you that when your back is turned, I'll do right by you? And it's difficult because we sell Creedence Goods. That's what economists call it. I'd never heard of that before. We wrote this book and we interviewed economists, but a credence good is where the person, there's one person that is diagnosing the problem, and that same person is fixing the problem. So I will give you an example. An example would be your car mechanic. So maybe I have this old B210. That's the Datsun, not a Nissan. Back in the day, okay? It's like 20 years old. It's a little B210. And it's got 200,000 miles on it, and it just makes this terrible noise when I drive it now. It goes ping, 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 ping. And so I go down to the mechanic, and I'm like, I'm a little scared. I got this like big sound coming out of this car, ping, 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 ping. Can you figure out what it is? Well, the mechanic could come back, and they could say to me, you need a valve job. It's $3,500 to replace the valves. But they could say, you know what? It's an old car, Tom. Put high test gasoline in it, and that'll probably help it run a little bit better. But you're just going to have to live with it. It's got 200,000 miles on it. You don't need a new valve job. So the mechanic is both diagnosing the problem and recommending a course of action. And we don't have that in consumer products. In consumer products, we diagnose a problem. My laptop is running slow. I need a new laptop because it's 5 years old. I diagnose the problem, and then I go shopping for a good laptop. But if we're dealing with something that I know nothing about, cars or cybersecurity or data transformation or intellectual property or engineering, I'm at your mercy to tell me the truth. And that's why it's so difficult, that to establish trust where I go, you know what, they're going to diagnose that it's, I mean, I have a mechanic that I trust, and I brought my truck in, and I said, I got this problem. And he said, oh, you know, he just like reset something. And I said, how much do I owe you? He goes, oh, nothing. That was nothing. Come back to me when you have a real problem. So he earned my trust in that moment, because I knew that he would do right by me. So that's the great challenge, I think, in expert services, is to figure out a way to build trust with those that you want to serve and that could most benefit from your expertise.
You have this something that I really wanted to pick up on, because it gets treatment, but I thought this was a very interesting connection between two parts of your book. There's a section on referrals, the significance of referrals and sort of how they work, and why to seek them out overtly and so on. But to me, referrals, I think, really are a kind of a marker of trust in their own way.
You know, you're absolutely right. And I mean, it's sort of terrifying for us in expert services to ask a client to like, who else could we do work for? Who do you know? Because for all the happy talk that they've been giving you about, thank you so much for helping us out, the willingness to stake their own political capital with other friends, and recommend you is the ultimate litmus test of whether or not you've done a good job or just an okay job. And we know that in our hearts, and it makes us reluctant to ask for referrals, because you remember 4 Tuesdays ago, we had that problem with the gig, and we had to rewrite this SOW, and I had to tack on another $10,000 to the assignment, and maybe that really upset the client, and maybe they won't give me a referral. So yeah, there's a tight connection between trust and political capital and creating raving fans that are willing to stake their reputation on a referral. I'll tell you, referrals are pretty easy. Like, I feel like insurance salesmen, they know this. They if they sell you some insurance, they never leave the scene of the accident without asking for 2 other people so that they could talk to, because it becomes an ever expanding network. But I found it not to be so daunting. When I talk with a client over drinks or something, I'm like, who are your best friends in the mining industry? And they're like, oh, these folks over here and this CF over here, we all went to school together, and we all then worked at one company together. And they're the people that I call. And then I just let it go. I sort of file it in the back of my mind. And then I come back 6 months into the gig, and I say, Kevin, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm trying to drive growth in my business. And I've got this niche around finance and mining companies. I want to ask you a huge favor, and don't do it if it doesn't make sense for you. But you said you were particularly close to these 2 other people, Sally and George. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to introduce me to them. I would love to sort of understand how their companies are facing problems that are similar to yours or different than yours. Is that something you'd be willing to do? And that they'll oftentimes say yes, where tactically, right? Because so much of business development is tactics. What we found is that if you leave it in their court, and you say, well, thanks, Kevin, for your willingness to introduce me to George. If you could just sort of broker an email introduction, that'd be great. It doesn't happen about 75% of the time, because you're just busy and you forget, and there's a little bit of like, I'm not sure I want to introduce this person. So what we always do is say, with your permission, what I'm going to do is reach out to George and say that we had talked and that you thought that it would be interesting for me to talk with you, George, and I'm going to copy you on the letter. So you own the action. You own the next step. You're not beholden to somebody else taking an action. It's a burden to make someone write an email. And so if I say, I'll write the email and I'll copy you to sort of verify that we have this conversation, but I'll characterize our conversation as, you said it would be interesting for the two of us to sort of talk.
Super interesting. I want to share one thing with you that I've learned, because
Please.
I've been trying to make a study of referrals, and there's one small thing that I've just found is really valuable for the serial quality of making people feel that referrals are great, and that is always letting somebody know that their referral has been executed or used. It seems like a
Mhm.
really small thing, but you really feel it if you're the referee. So if, you know,
What happened with that? Yeah.
if I asked you, hey Tom, do you mind recommending a great elk hunting outfitter in Montana, and you say, sure, it's Dave Bennett. You have to contact Dave Bennett. And I go, thanks. And it's the last thing you ever hear from me. You think, well, Dave must have screwed it up, or Kevin never contacted him, or you don't know what. And that those 3 words, thanks, Dave's great, or whatever,
Go a long
actually
way. We had a
go a
wonderful
long way.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
To sort of saying, the next time you say, is there anyone else I could talk to about, dove hunting? Do you know somebody about like that? Yeah.
Yes,
It's
and
interesting.
suddenly, and I think I've been trying to study why that is, and my sense of it is not only just now I'm not in the dark, but you feel that sense of validation around, hey, I didn't just notionally add a bit of value to the world, I practically and genuinely did, and you've suddenly a few more dendrites in the community are like connected in a way that you didn't
Right.
know if they were. Like you can't validate that the connection's been made, but now you know, and you've been the source of it. There really is something just kind of, I think, profoundly satisfying about that, and dissatisfying if you don't do it.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think I would add two things to your sort of construct. One is, look, we all know psychologically there are lots of studies that show us that we tend to reciprocate generosity.
Mm,
So and we kind of, as kind of reptilian animals, we keep a little ledger in our mind of who owes us favors. Um, because we know that we did a solid to them, and so they'll do a solid for us. That we know that they'll reciprocate. And so I just want to know if I made this introduction and it was really helpful for you, maybe you even made a lot of money on it. I'm going to be way less hesitant in the future to call you up and say, hey, my daughter's trying to get in this school. Do you know anyone at this school that I could talk to about the admissions process? So there's that, and then I think there's this human, natural. We're all very busy, and we have these little initiatives, and then there's follow through and follow up, and we don't like open loops. We like closure. Open loops drive us sort of
yes.
crazy, and so simply just closing the loop, it helps us sort of put it aside and get it out of our brains, and lets us move on. And that sort of gift of decluttering someone's head is really helpful. And the next time, if you introduce me to George, the next time you see George, you go, hey, Tom said that you guys had a really nice conversation. I hope that was helpful for you. If you have an open loop, the next time you see George, you're like, you want to dodge that question because I don't even know if I reached out or not.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
it's interesting.
Well, maybe that's a book or a short book for something in the future. The actual mechanics, how clients refer, we'll call
So I'll
it.
tell you, we wrote about referral also in Never Say Sell, that subsequent book. And as hard as it is to ask for referrals from clients to other companies that you could potentially serve, it's doubly hard to ask for referrals within a company. So it seems like, not to stray into that other book, but it seems like if I do good work for you, Kevin, you'll be tripping over yourself to sort of refer me to other people in the organization that I could help. But it never seems to happen. And when
Mm,
we ask for referrals from satisfied division heads to other division heads, they never seem to follow through. They follow through way less than when we were asking for a referral to another company. And
mm,
there's a whole raft of reasons why that's true, but they have to spend political capital. They don't know the other people. They're in competition with other division heads, and they don't want to share their secret sauce. But their referrals are difficult outside of a company, but even more difficult inside a company that you're already serving and doing good work for. I mean, we do about $100,000 worth of work for Thomson Reuters, which is a $14 billion company, right? Worldwide company. And we've done $100,000 worth of work for them, I'm ashamed to say, for about 18 years. And somehow we've never expanded our footprint inside of, they're satisfied, right? They keep doing work with us. They're very satisfied. And yet we can never get them to sort of refer us across the organization, even though there are literally hundreds of places we could do the exact same thing for other parts of Thomson Reuters. Well, that's on us to figure out how to overcome that referral barrier.
Yeah, this, obviously the NPS or the Net Promoter Score is something that has risen to a lot of prominence, but there is a real difference between, you see this in political polling too, right? There's a real difference between what people will say in the privacy of an online QR code poll where they go, I'd absolutely refer to you, to my friends and colleagues. You go, can you refer me to your friends and colleagues? Like, I can't think of anybody. Or like, not at this time. Like, okay. Now we have to, we need another score, which is the, like, other than the NPS, it's like they actually did refer score.
Yeah, would you really do this? Right.
Yeah,
it's so true.
I want to stick to the time we said we would. I've got, we could do this for another 2 hours from my side. But Tom, where can people best find you? Where can people read more about you, your organization, the books that you're writing? How would you like to sort of direct people to find you?
Yeah, so I mean, our firm is called Profitable Ideas Exchange, and our website is profitableideas.com. And my email, Tom McMakin, is tmcmakin@profitableideas. So you could just write me. You could get on our website. We have the books on the website. There's also, How Clients Buy has its own website called howclientsbuy.net. You could get on there, but on the main Profitable Ideas website, there's a blog and other writings and things like that. But yeah, I think it's pretty easy to get. You can just Google me, and I'm pretty accessible, right? Because I'm a chief revenue officer, and so when people want to reach out to me, I don't want to make it hard. I want to make it easy. So that's another thing. You get on big consulting firms' websites and you drill down into their cybersecurity practice, and you can't find an email. You cannot figure out how to reach them. I'm like, you got to get over yourself. You got to figure out some way in which people can like make contact with you. They're aware of you. They understand what you need. They have an interest, and they're trying to understand more about your capabilities and build trust. And you have this giant wall that says, no, not unless you have the secret password. Don't do that. That's a tip.
Fantastic. Bonus tip for the finish.